Especially me, but here we are.
And while she's getting set up, I encouraged her to prepare a presentation, and she's recording this for submittal to a couple places where she's going to speak. They want to see.
I'm recording it to post all of you on YouTube? No. I'm not. I promise you, I am not recording you, I'm recording me. And it won't be used for any public purpose at all. I'm submitting it to be a speaker for another venue. So my kind audio-visual genius has agreed to record us here today.
So can you hear her okay? You have to really speak up there.
Probably for us and for your recording, it would be good to speak up.
Yeah, and I wonder, is that the air conditioning, the noise?
I think it's just really good sound suppression.
All right, I'll speak up, and if I'm way too delicate, that would be weird because, like you, I'm a company president, so delicate isn't. He said I'm the hired gun. I was going to say I feel like I'm the hired hug, not the hired gun. But it sort of depends on the context, right? As we all know. On September 17th, 2011, about 1,000 people gathered in Zuccotti Park in Wall Street in New York. Zuccotti Park was the first Occupy protest that got widespread attention. By October 9th, 3 weeks later, more than 951 protests in 82 countries, including more than 600 protests in the United States, had occurred. 3 weeks. Occupy has been called a contagious and leaderless movement, aimed at inserting topics into the national conversation or the global conversation, and it differs from previous social protests in that it was not centrally orchestrated and it didn't make specific demands. I spent some time walking through Pioneer Park in 2011 with the Occupy protesters in my first semester of PhD school, trying not to look like the running dog capitalist that I sometimes am, and researching their perspectives and trying to understand. And one of the things that was really obvious from the ground and that scholars have said about the Occupy movement is that there were not a specific set of demands. It was about wage equality at a macro level and about inequality in society at a macro level, but it wasn't, we want to be allowed to sit on the front seat of the bus. It wasn't as specific as previous protests. And it formed seemingly spontaneously, spread quickly, and ended within a few months. So most of us as business people are familiar with the Occupy movement and the protests that it spawned through 2012. And we most likely all have opinions about the ideology of the movement. So I didn't bring up Occupy to engage in any of those ideological debates. I brought up Occupy to start a conversation about organizing, how people work together, when and why they work together, and what organizational forms they create and join in order to enable that shared work. And more importantly, how organizing is changing in recent years, because I think that's something we as business people need to pay attention to. Many organizational scholars, myself included, consider Occupy to be an early example of network-based organizing, where loosely affiliated individuals come together and there's not a principal authority. The Arab Spring protests the year before was similar to that, but it started in Tunisia and spread, worldwide in many ways. But Occupy kind of took it to the next level. The Tea Party movement is another example of a supposedly leaderless organization. I thought Dwayne had an interesting experience with the Tea Party movement. Tell us about your Tea Party experience.
Okay, so I had a lapse of judgment and decided to run for state senator. I had some people that encouraged me because they didn't like the current state senator. Anyway, so it was in the Republican Party and they had the caucuses. And a lot of the caucus members were Tea Party members. And so one of them was the self-proclaimed leader of the Tea Party movement in Utah. And he said, well, are you a Tea Party member? And I said, how do you join? Right? I said, I didn't know there was actually an official organization. And he said, well, it's too late now. right? I said, like some of the principles I agree with, but I don't even know how, like, is this an organization? And so it was unclear to me. So it was never really a formal organization, but it became national in scope.
He doesn't know if he's joined.
But I don't know who was in charge of it on a nationwide level. Mike Lee somehow was considered a Tea Party candidate.
Self-proclaimed.
Anyway, I just thought it was really fascinating.
So why do we as business people care how a social movement is organized? Especially a social movement known to be ideologically at odds with many of the values held by the business community and by people who run companies. I would argue it's because a discussion of organizing is a discussion of the relationship between individual and institution. And like it or not, corporations are institutions in society. So if people are protesting institutions, if people are interacting with institutions differently than they used to, if they are joining institutions or doing other things with institutions differently than they used to, it affects our ability to create and sustain organizations in our own companies where people can and want to work together. And this talk just highlights some recent trends in organizing and explores what those trends might mean for business people. Specifically, I'll argue that some fundamental shifts are occurring between the individual and the institution in American society. So this is enabled by greater flows of information, because flow always changes organizing, and easier methods of connecting independent of geography. So a lot of people have asked me, did social media cause the things you're talking about? Well, in trend spotting, we don't talk about cause and effect. I do not know what has caused these things, and neither do you, really, as we get talking about them. There's no absolutes. We're not saying everybody thinks this way, this activity led to this thing, the things I'm going to describe for you happen everywhere in every group. That's not how trend spotting works. So I'm not here making a universal case, and I'll just make that disclaimer up front. I am here helping us identify some trends and giving you some practical examples of how my company has worked with some of these trends and what they might mean for business. So individuals are disaffiliating with formal organizations, churches, schools, governments, corporations, political parties, in record numbers. They're protesting against institutional control, and they're self-organizing rather than accepting organizations created for them. And they're looking for organizations they can find satisfaction in, rather than assuming that satisfaction will be found in the traditional groups that their family or their religious upbringing or their location suggests will satisfy them. So more people now lead organizations rather than just join them. Organization is undertaken more frequently. Essentially, organization itself has become a bottom-up tool of the populace rather than a top-down mechanism used by people in charge, as we might be used to. As business people, we create departments, we create companies, we structure how people work together, we form organizations. So how can company leaders, interact in this new egalitarian world of individual empowerment that is sometimes called anti-institutional? How do we hire people and get them to work toward a common goal when their experiences in the broader society have taught them that top-down organizations suppress their individuality? How about when they're accustomed to creating an organizational structure for themselves rather than just accepting a structure created by someone else? There is a new desire for individual freedom that is dismantling the workplace as we know it, disrupting the workplace as we know it. If business leaders don't figure out how we can change our policies and our practices so as to maximize personal liberty and minimize group control while also getting the work done, our employees may abandon us in droves. The Wayfair petition we were talking about yesterday, 500 employees petitioning about what Wayfair is doing, who they're selling to. It would be a loss if we didn't figure this out, because organizational research suggests that individuals today still want connection. They still want to, in fact, they're craving that connection more than ever before, and they still want to work with others. They want a place to belong. They want their work to make a difference. They want to matter. So in short, they want the same thing businesses want, same thing business people want. But the challenge for people managers is to capitalize on employees' desires to contribute to the group while simultaneously respecting their need for individual freedom, and to do it in a way that is actually practical and financially viable, which is the piece that is often missing from the conversation. When my organizational communication scholar friends talk about these topics, they talk about overthrowing business and overthrowing societal institutions and allowing people to be free. But they don't actually talk about all the benefits that come from the institutions in society nearly as often, and what we as business people create with our employees in terms of opportunity and economic improvement. And so one of the things I study and I'm trying to bring into the discussion is that those two worlds do need to come together, because we live in a practical world where we have to figure out how to make this work. So we're going to talk about 4 things today. We're going to talk about 3 new paradigms about organizing. So we're going to go through what is happening with organizing and practices that we're seeing in society with organizing. And then that'll lead us to 3 ways people are now thinking about organizations and institutions. And then from that, we'll talk about what people want and don't want in their organizations. All people, all the time, in every organization. Okay, that it's not a universal. That's the last time I'll say that. Then we're going to talk about 6 principles for workplace freedom. Kind of a principle-oriented approach, because I can show you some practical examples, and I will give you some practical examples. I have some handouts, and I can make those available to you digitally if you prefer. I feel like you should have the freedom, since I'm speaking about freedom, to absorb these materials any way you want. And you can look at them in here and throw them away on your way out the door and then ask for a digital copy. I'm good with that. Whatever works for you. But we can talk about these practices all day, and you'll have ideas for practices in your own company. The principles, I think, are what we can take away from the trend. The practices will be customized. Then we're just going to kind of summarize the old way and the new way. The old way where institutions were viewed differently than the new way where institutions are now viewed in light of some of these recent practices in organizing. All right, any comments or questions up to that point? We'll have a little more open discussion, but that's kind of the framing of what we're doing. Okay.
Everybody excited?
Could you just dance or something? No, I understand. All right, so new paradigms about organizing. Let's talk about what is happening with organizing. What are we seeing? One of the things we're seeing is multiple memberships. Multiple memberships. So those of you in the room who are over 40, I want you to think back to your 20s. I want you to think about how many groups you were part of in your 20s. I was part of a school alumni group. I was part of a workplace group and a department within that workplace. I was a runner, so I had a local running group that I participated in. I was part of a church group there in my community. I have racked my brain and cannot come up with other groups that I would consider myself part of.
Book club.
Book club, okay. A book club group. You'd meet periodically to review books. Other groups that you may have been part of?
Did you have a sub-social group?
I had no social life. I worked.
Okay.
Oh, wait. That's
On a
all of
level,
you.
I found it interesting talking with my kids and whatnot. I loved the little town I was from. I loved the high school I went to. I loved that I was from Utah and that I was from the United States and proud citizen of planet Earth. Whatever it is, I felt that sense of a group as well. And my kids could care less about their high school and could care less about.
Interesting.
And they're embarrassed that they're from Utah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Our groups were really location dependent, right? My community, my neighborhood, these people next door, the school that we all go to, the city that we all live in, this state and country that we all live in. Yeah, interesting point. the memberships that we used to be part of were usually countable on one or two hands, right? That is not true anymore with organizing. And it's not just virtual groups, and scholars really have made a pretty compelling argument that a virtual group has many of the same aspects of a physical group in terms of an organization. So virtual does matter. But the notion of membership has changed. I'm part of a whole bunch of things. This is a smattering of the 100+ Facebook groups I'm part of. Now, I'm a researcher, academic researcher, and a business person, and I have affiliations all across the map. You would have a hard time identifying my identity from my list of groups because I'm a researcher. So I do that on purpose. But I'm not unusual in having 100 or more groups that I hear something from somebody in those groups and connect in some way with those groups, and in some cases follow on with physical activity. I meet those people. Even a garage sale group, you meet those people, right? You think about it, that connection between online and offline is actually far more real than you might have thought of it, right? But multiple memberships. I am in multiple groups. What are the implications for the workplace of multiple memberships? Any thoughts?
Spread yourself too thin.
Spread yourself too thin? Meaning your employees might be spread too thin, or you might be spread too thin? Yeah, there's a concept in scholarship called greedy organization, which is this organization, the more greedy an organization is, the more of your time and energy and emotion it takes, right? The workplace could be more greedy when there wasn't 100 memberships, right? That's a good point. Any other thoughts on the effect of multiple memberships?
Well, it puts employees, expands their networking, so they have more opportunities for different places of employment.
Yeah.
More people they know, and it's more likely they would leave your.
Or is it? It's more likely they'll talk to people outside of you. People used to get their information from those 5 memberships. That was really how you saw the world, and you would turn on the news too. But they are talking to a lot of people that are not you now. And that's different than we're used to. We're going to talk about whether that's good or bad and whether it causes them to leave or not. But it's a good point.
You can put labels on yourself as well.
Say it again.
You label yourself. Like if
I
you're a
am
member
this,
of,
I am that.
I am this, I'm that. So, if you're a member of the NRA or you're a member of a church organization, other people will immediately draw conclusions from whatever groups you show that you belong to.
And we know that in the workplace differently than we used to, right? My employees know my membership groups because several of them have friended me on LinkedIn or friended me on Facebook. And these are not things I talk about at work, but now I'm talking about them at work. So that's an interesting point, right? Groups with conflicting ideals or purposes. This is very common in recent years, partly because geography is not a requirement to join groups anymore, and partly because multiple memberships, this is my theory, multiple memberships means I'm exposed to a variety of ideas, and so I'm way more comfortable with hearing a variety of ideas than I used to be, right? I literally follow the Utah Republican Party and the Utah County Democratic Party on LinkedIn. Why? Am I Republican or Democrat? Well, you won't know from looking at what I'm following. But I find value in that because I find it shows me the party's perspectives, and I find that interesting. I am not alone in that. That is what scholars are seeing that people are doing. They're joining, a protest group against a policy of their church, and they're joining a devotional group about their church. And they're in both, and occasionally it comes up in real life, and they have to defend why they're in both, right? That is not something that could easily happen in the past, meaning that that you had to get in your car and physically travel in front of the neighbors to the meeting that was happening down the street that night and declare your allegiance in ways that you don't always have to do with what's been enabled in the virtual world. So what's the implication for the workplace of that?
So I'm curious, since you brought up politics, so I wrote down a note that is this self-organizing versus the traditional organizing, right? Mm-hmm. Is this what we see with what's happening in the Democrat Party today, where essentially the far left, if you call it that, is self-organizing against, or at least maybe not even against, just it's happening naturally or coincidentally or whatever the reason is, against the traditional organization of the Democrat Party. Is that the two?
Yeah, that's a perfect example of self-organizing, right? Self-organizing is I can get other people together to do a particular thing. And if you think about your grandfather or your father, that probably wasn't how he viewed the world, that he could just get people together to do. I mean, there were unions. People have been protesting institutions from the beginning of time in a variety of ways, banding together. I'm not saying this is new. I'm saying the convergence of these trends is...
And I think it's caught the party totally off guard because they haven't thought about it. I guess that's what
Yeah,
makes it us is-
most institutions have been totally caught off guard by this. Let's don't be ourselves. Yeah, I think you're right. The Republican Party is having the same problem, actually. All right, decentralized organizing. So we gave these examples already of decentralized organizing and what that's all about. Decentralized organizing is interesting because it tells me that power comes from the number of peers I gather and not from any single institutional authority. Think about that for a minute. Apparently, it's a centralized slide. All right, blurred boundaries between groups. So have you ever participated on Facebook, for example, and had one of your friends make a comment on something and then had a completely different person from a different social network in your life make a comment to that friend? The first time this happened to me, and one of my academic friends and one of my church friends engaged in a conversation about a topic on my Facebook thread, it messed with me. I was like, you people do not know each other. More importantly, I act a certain way when I'm talking academic and a certain way when I'm talking church, and I don't think they're ideologically in conflict, but I rhetorically don't have to manage my messages with both of you in the room. Right? It's different when your groups blend. It's different when your groups blend. What happens when the hearty dialogue about the environment that my employees are engaged in outside of their work group intersects with something I might say about what we should or shouldn't do related to the environment in our company. Those groups just intersected, right, in really interesting ways. So there is a group called Healthy Sexuality or something like that for Mormon women. I am in this group. Too much information, perhaps? Go with me on this. So I'm in this group. I'm mostly a lurker in this group, but I am in this group. And the other day, unexpectedly, my 19-year-old married daughter posted in this group about how often she and her husband do the deed. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, how did you get in this group? This is way too much blurring of my group boundaries. I do not want to have this conversation with you in public. I do not want to know this information about you. I have no problem talking about sex, but it was totally contextually wrong. And I did not know how to respond, so I didn't respond. I sort of opted out, and I didn't opt out of the group, but I just withdrew from that conversation. Blurring of boundaries. It's really kind of an interesting organizational phenomenon. Blurring of boundaries. More chances to lead. I mean, if I have 100 different things I'm part of versus 4 or 5, I have more opportunities to play different roles in those groups. I have more opportunities to lead or to follow. I have a niece who is an accomplished event planner. She's 26 years old, I think, and she has run major events. She's in demand. Everyone who hires her to run these events is thrilled with her. She's been doing events since she was 16. And she's in her last semester of college, and every time she runs an event for the college, they treat her like a little girl, who maybe could get them a drink. And this is a machine, and this is how we set it up for the event. And it drives her crazy that she can lead in one place and is expected to be a follower in another place. In her mind, if she's a leader, she could be a leader everywhere because it's about who she is, and she doesn't know why these people won't recognize that. Right? Our identity is taking a different. Our identity is becoming more important than our role, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So your workplace has to give more chances to lead. Spoiler. Hello. All right, another thing that's happening, temporary groups. Groups are forming and dissolving. And that didn't used to happen. A group was so hard to start. You know, you had to walk around and get everyone to sign the petition. You had to, when you think about reorganization at your company, you probably have this perception that organization is complex, that you don't do it accidentally, that there's messaging surrounding it, that it's difficult to reorganize in some ways, right? You don't just do it. You're like, I need stability for these people. Let's don't reorganize every 5 minutes. The broader society is reorganizing constantly. So we, in an institutional setting, are kind of at odds with that broader society that's reorganizing constantly. You know, I threw up a Slack channel at work to bring a group together for an initiative we were working on and a meeting we were holding, and I'll cancel the Slack channel next week. It's an organization. You don't necessarily think of it as an organization, but it's a group of people getting together, working together in a certain way for a certain topic. It's a fluid organization. It's a transitory organization. It's not just a temporary, it's not just a normal and accidental part of our daily interaction. It's actually an organizational form. And that's what scholars are finding, is that the fact that an organization can dissolve at a moment's notice changes my perception of how stability matters to me. Right? Why are people leaving jobs so frequently? I don't know. But it might be that organizations dissolve a lot and new ones start. There's a group called Pantsuit Nation on Facebook that formed in the middle of the Clinton-Trump election, a time period we would all probably be happy to forget because of the trauma in society that surrounded it in dialogue. Pantsuit Nation formed for this election. And then another group formed called Beyond Pantsuit Nation, because they didn't think Pantsuit Nation was properly addressing race issues in this. And then another group formed as a protest to Beyond Pantsuit Nation. And then that group, the second group disappeared, and then the first group disappeared, and then the third group disappeared, and then the first group has now, become a powerhouse and kind of changed its direction on what it's temporary organizing. Okay? This, I think, is one of the more significant organizing practices we're seeing. Affiliation is fluid. Not just organizations are coming and going, but people are coming and going. They are feeling free to enter and exit with less stigma, with less shame, with less pressure, with less guilt than they used to from organizations. Give you a couple of examples of this. That, are people having trouble with long-term connections? I mean, one argument is that they are, and that workers are changing jobs in the U.S. every 4.4 years. Now, I've actually seen every 3 years from a couple of other sources. And I think anecdotally, we can see that in our own lives, the lives of our children and our employees, changing jobs is a thing. Is changing jobs a thing because organizations are dissolving, or is changing jobs a thing because people feel free to enter and exit? Probably both. We don't know. Well, go ahead.
So are you suggesting that in the future, so I just think traditionally, right, we set up organizations, sales, engineering, marketing, whatever, right? And so people are in those groups, and the company is an organization.
Yep.
And then you get sort of pulled out onto a project team sometimes, but you're still originally affiliated with your traditional job, let's call it. Are you suggesting that maybe we need to think about being more fluid in the sense of the organization and to be not labeled as, let's say, an engineer, but I'm working in this project or this group in this period of time, and then I can freely move over and be a sales guy, and then, based on the company needs, which is kind of exciting to think about, that people would be open to that kind of fluidity versus traditionally, like I thought I was going to be an engineer and work in the same company for 30 years. That clearly hasn't happened. Exciting
and quite a bit different, and it's hard to see a path from here to there, right? Like what we're going to talk about today are some practical things too. The rise of the project-based organizing, where it crosses a formal organizational line in an institution and people from different departments get pulled into a project, that is consistent with the trends you're seeing here. Project-based organizing is one way that institutions have responded to this this changing desire for freedom and flexibility. People want a series of experiences. They don't just want one.
Right. also, why people may be
Siloed
leaving is
function.
they want to try a new thing. Whereas they could have probably tried it in the current organization had the organization been open to allowing that fluidity without sort of being stuck in your organizational structure, I guess.
Excuse
I've
me.
even tried that in my marriage. I started as the boss, and now I'm the janitor.
You have seen that fluidity. Well, and marriage is a perfect example of an organization that most of us don't think we should exit. We're committed to our marriages. We feel like they're very important. But what happens when they no longer meet our needs? We try to do something about the organization, right? That's kind of what I'm proposing for business organizations. Let's adjust and change how we're approaching group control and what we're allowing or enabling, or at least not getting in the way of people trying to do. Because it really doesn't make practical sense to throw out business and to throw out departments and to throw out organization. I don't believe that society will exist very effectively without institutions. Others do believe that, so it's okay if you don't. But if you believe that. But college students drop out and
sounds
transfer.
like a yes. What you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. The answer is, if you look at these trends and you think it would work for you, then yes. Right?
I don't know if it would work for me. It's kind of exciting, but also scary.
Doesn't that just describe a trend right there? So divorces, breakups are high. College students are transferring a lot. These are just some institutional, some studies about formal institutions that have been seeing entry and exit different than they expected. Okay. So the rise of the nuns. Has anyone ever seen this book before? It's actually a really fascinating book. The Pew Center for Research, which is a well-known research group, did a study in 2012 of 35,000 Americans, and they asked about their religious affiliation. And they discovered, for the first time ever, that none, I have no religious affiliation, I'm unaffiliated with any formal religion, was the fastest growing category. Faster growing than all other religions in the United States. This was very significant for religious scholars because they had been clamoring already to figure out why church membership seemed to be declining and, why the ways that the churches have always done things wasn't necessarily appealing anymore. And so this study came out right at that time, and the rise of the nuns has become a pretty significant thing to people who are studying formal organization. The independents are now the biggest partisan group in the United States. So a plurality of all registered voters nationwide identify as independents. I'm going to pick on you for a second. Tell us your VFW story.
Heather and I were talking about this, but I'm a veteran, and usually, all my peers, most of my peers from my community are unaffiliated with the VFW or any veteran organization and do not publicly identify as veterans. And you go back to my grandfather, who was a World War II veteran, and he was very much pro-VFW, pro-Elks Club, pro these groups, and it's absolutely the complete opposite direction of my peers.
Why?
Just don't see any value in it.
He said, we don't join those things. When I asked him this question, he said, we're just forming our own groups that deliver what we need. Was anecdotally very supportive of this
But
point.
isn't it likely that the nuns will become sons? Like,
The independent becomes
Because
its own
the book is-
affiliation.
the book is already identifying them as a group.
Right.
Whereas before they didn't want to be in the group.
Right.
So now, independents want to be independent, but now independents become...
It plays to my belief and scholars' research that people want to be connected.
Yeah, they want
that
to
we
be.
are going to continue to connect together to do things. It's just that the way in which we talk about it is changing, and the way in which the compromises of our individual identity that are required to do things with other people, the line might be in a little different place than it used to be. Yeah.
Isn't that also a response because some people doesn't know really what they want? So independent is also that gives them the freedom to choose something different maybe in 2 months or 3 months. It's maybe lack of direction could be also that.
Yeah.
I mean, just not necessarily that they have a focus or that they are against the, how would I say it now, a party or a group itself. It's just they don't know what they are.
Yeah, or they don't want to be fixed in that place. My research has demonstrated that people want the option to develop their identity however they want, and they feel like aligning with organizations fixes their identity in a certain way. And if their identity changes, then how do they manage that? And so they're, in many cases, choosing to unaffiliate formally, even if they agree with the things the organization does. Now, organizing now takes place in public. Have you noticed? Have you noticed that what you do takes place in public? Have you noticed that salaries really are public at your company, even if you don't make them public? Have you noticed that whatever back channel thing you were planning to do with reorganizing a particular department doesn't seem like much of a surprise when you actually do it? Have you noticed that your internal company business is posted in reviews sometimes by customers? Organizing takes place in public. Now, I know we all know that, meaning that we all realize that we have to pay a little more attention to what the rest of the world thinks of us as business people than we used to, and get a good PR firm and manage it differently. But think about it at a fundamental level. If it's the act of people working together is now done in public, that means that all the things that go into how people work together, which is my reluctance to work with you, my excitement to work with you, my frustration about what you just said to me, my desire that I'm in charge instead of you, all of the stuff that goes into organizing that we are used to managing in an individual way with individual people in a respectful and humane and helpful way, right? Like we do our organizing benevolently in business. All of that is now public. There's really nothing that isn't public in organizing. And if you accept that premise, it means you have to focus on not just sounding like you're not doing the wrong thing, but not actually doing the wrong thing, because they're running out whatever you do. It's all public. It's all public. So the only exclusivity anymore in organizing is to protect. And this is kind of an interesting thing that's happening with organizing. There is this societal norm that organizations are supposed to be open, right? That inclusivity is a thing. Everyone should be allowed to join. I should be part of this and I should be part of that, and you can't keep me out. And Rotary Club needs to change its gender demographics, and the organizations need to change and allow everybody in. But yet there are still organizations that are very difficult to join. And they claim that they need to be difficult to join because the system and the people in charge have historically not given them a voice at the table in organizing, and so they've formed their own organization to get a voice at the table. An example is the Pantsuit Nation group I talked about earlier. Pantsuit Nation is a private Facebook group. You cannot find it on a search engine. I mean, the black crowd can find it on a search engine, the black hat internet people, but you can't find it on a search engine. You have to be invited to join by someone who is a member, right? It grew to almost 2.5 million members in, what did I say yesterday, like 2 months? I mean, it grew unbelievably fast. But the reason it exists, its stated purpose was to provide a safe space for people who supported Hillary Clinton to be able to talk about her policies and their views and the societal issues that they think went with it without being shut down or corrected. Right? So it was on purpose designed to be an exclusive space that protected people, kept them from being able to derail the people who felt like they didn't have a voice. It's interesting. I tried to join, I did some research with people who were Mormons or LDS as young women, but they did not need to be LDS as adults. They could be affiliated with anyone or not affiliated with any religious group. And I wanted to be sure I had a wide variety represented in my research, and so I attempted to post my research call everywhere. I attempted to post it in groups that had affiliation with active Mormons, groups that had affiliation with disaffected Mormons or former Mormons or Utahns or women or, anyone associated with the local schools in the area, just a wide variety of people that might in some way connect to this. And I could not at first get access to the largest ex-Mormon group. because access is quite restricted. And I actually had to have a meeting with the moderator of that group and assure him that I was not going to cause harm, that I was there for research, that I was not going to shut anybody down. I had to show him my research. I had to assure him that I had affiliation with both University of Utah and BYU, and therefore I was neutral. I had to demonstrate. And then he said, you can go post your call, but you need to use my name, otherwise they will shut you down. You need to say that I gave you permission to do this. So that's kind of weird in a world where everything's public. Everything's public except the things you can't join because you're in the power position. Think about that. Think about that.
It's the freedom of speech conflict we're having today in society.
Say it again.
This is the freedom, to me, there's this conflict of freedom of speech, right? So we have it constitutionally, but yet when we exercise it, we have a massive potential people that come against it to try to shut it down.
Well, and I think you can see that with
So
any kind of freedom.
digitally, it's happening.
Yeah, I think you can see that with any kind of freedom. The actual application of freedom is way more complex than the rhetoric about freedom, right? You know, you want to give your kids freedom, and so you spell out for them what you're going to pay for them and what they're going to pay for themselves in an effort to make them more self-reliant and therefore more free. Or is he controlling his kids by telling them that they're going to pay this? And is it okay to control? It's the application of freedom is always more complicated, and it's way more complicated when done in public. By the way, way more complicated. The private sphere is public. So what this means is things that used to be private, like my daughter's personal sex life, things that used to be private are public sphere. Public sphere in communication scholarship has typically been identified as the sphere where people come together to make policy, to debate issues that affect all of us, right? And the argument was, your bedroom habits do not affect all of us, so they don't belong in the public sphere, right? Well, part of the resistance to institutions has been this, what I have to say is as valid as what you have to say. And if my experience is in the home, then I should be able to bring arguments about the home into the public sphere. It's actually an ideological resistance to talk freely about private things, typically private things in a public setting. It's not just because Facebook has made it available to everybody, but it's because it's a form of institutional resistance to bring things into the discussion that if you felt they were silenced before, right? So that's part of why private sphere and public sphere are blurring. And you're not just in front of your employees in a public setting, you're in front of their spouses and their children and maybe their parents, right? Frequent reorganizing. Groups are just shifting purposes way more often in broader society than used to happen in business. Organizing can give the average person resources. So we are good at monetizing organization. That's what our businesses are. That's our entire business is about monetizing organization. How people work together, turning that into something that actually makes money, right? We've had a pretty good corner on that in business. We are the ones who knew how to monetize. Other people could get together and maybe affect societal change, but we're the ones who knew how to monetize. Other people are having success monetizing outside of business. I mean, Kickstarter is just an example. A lot of the other crowdsourced fundraising, there's actually legitimate resources, money and goods, that can change hands because of self-organizing now. Other people are figuring out how to monetize. You're not the only option for economic prosperity and viability anymore. Ever think of Kickstarter as an organizational trend and a delivery of money and resources? I didn't till I started studying this. And finally, people join for purpose. Not because of the sponsor lives near them, geography, a particular institution is running something, or authority. Now, this is not always true. A lot of times, in the last time we talked about this, someone brought up that people join for peers. That is true. People still join for other reasons. They join for peers. They join, because mom said to. They join for a lot of reasons. But it is common in society now for a statement of purpose to be in front of me before I decide to join. Like if you just look at the public school versus charter school world and the charter school movement in Utah specifically, before we had a plethora, a whole bunch of charter schools, you went to the local elementary school because you lived there and it was there. And you might at some point, if you had problems with the teacher administration, you might pull up the mission and read it and kind of see, like, why are you having such trouble? But really you didn't care because that was the institution you were supposed to be part of. But if you want to send your kid to a charter school, you will most likely pull up the charter for the charter school. Pull up the mission. You'll say, what is this school all about? What will my child's experience at this school be? You will choose the school based on the charter, not based on the location. Now the location will be a factor. If there's 3 charter schools and one of them's 20 minutes away and 2 of them are 5 minutes away, unless these charters are terrible in terms of your alignment, you'll probably go there. But you are joining with a more mission-driven sense than you were. Well, companies know this. We've been coming up with mission statements and core values, and we've been kind of trying to respond to this in that it seems like our employees want to know the big picture purpose more than maybe they did in the past. So I'm not saying we're missing this trend. I'm saying the significance of these is how they all come together at the same time. A freedom to enter and exit is a lot different when I have 100 groups I'm a member of, right? Because I know more about what's going on, and these modify each other. So paradigm. Organizations exist to serve me. I don't exist to serve them. Before you just attribute this to selfishness, take a minute and think it through. Organizations exist to serve me. How many times have you, even in a CEO position, recently said, this particular thing I'm part of is not working for me. Vistage is not set up the way I want. That Dwayne needs to change his model. Hypothetically, because Dwayne's awesome, so we know that's hypothetical. But this running group doesn't meet at the right time. We do not even, as power people, we are used to changing things that don't work for us, but your kids do the same thing. Your employees do the same thing. I would argue it's not necessarily tied to your position of power, your willingness to change organizations. That might exacerbate it a little bit. That might magnify that tendency. But what we're finding is that people now believe organizations exist to serve them. Now, if you go back again to your father and your grandfather, did your grandfather believe that the company existed to serve him?
No.
Not a chance.
Not a chance.
That's
No.
not what your country can do for you.
But what you can do for your country. Great example. Great example. Now, do we still believe in serving our country? Do we still believe in being part of organizations? Do we like that messaging? It's the messaging that's the problem. We now believe organizations exist to serve us. The populace, the general public, has been turned on to the power of organizing. And they believe organizing should serve them. A second paradigm. Change comes from the group, not from a specific individual. So peers are more important than authority figures in getting change through. So have you ever had an employee who worked really hard to lobby everybody around them so that they could come as a group to tell you that something needed to be changed? And you were like, why don't you just bring it to me? I would have changed it. It's not a big deal. I'm open to this. Why don't you just come to me? Why'd you get everybody all riled up? Well, because society now, the trend is that peers are how you accomplish change. It doesn't mean they have a problem with you as the manager. They just didn't occur to them that you were empowered to make that change easier than mustering all the peers. Think about that in the workplace. It's not that you as a manager are unempowered. It's that they don't even think of you first anymore. You needed a problem solved. In the past, you went to the person in charge. You petitioned the government figure running it. You went to the manager who could change something. You went to mom and dad to change something in the family. The tendency to muster peers is a function of societal changes in organizing, not just a function of I can tweet you easier than I used to be able to. Right? Oh, and this is the one. Where'd you go? Yeah, go ahead.
It just makes me think, because you see simultaneously kind of this other movement, which is, regular people getting into positions of authority in politics, which in some ways seems to contradict that, because it sounds like you're saying, like, that you don't recognize authority positions, you recognize peer positions, but you also have this other thing going on.
Well, it's really interesting because we leverage our peers to get something done because we don't believe the authority figure is relevant to getting it done. And the outcome of leveraging our peers is often that one of us becomes the authority figure in the peer group. Right. So what does that mean? Like, I think in some ways it means that we can't really overthrow the notion of leadership. Right? That leaderless, Occupy is known as a leaderless movement, except if you go and research Occupy, you will find that there's a man who calls himself the co-founder of the Occupy movement. Now, how is he the co-founder of a leaderless movement? That's interesting, right? And he claims to be the co-founder of a leaderless movement. And he wrote a book on it. And I'm like, I don't think leaderless means what you think it means, right? He became the leader. And it's true, he wrote one of the manifestos early on that kind of spurred the whole deal. And now he's making money as the leader of the leaderless movement. So yeah, I don't think it's contradictory. I think it's a natural emergence of what happens when groups get together is leaders officially authorized, or by position or by expert or by appearance, people become leaders. So this is not necessarily an anti-leader movement. It's a change is affected by crowds, not by single people, and not by people in charge or institutionally. Yeah.
I may have a different opinion.
Great.
I'm not trying to.
You can disagree.
Maybe coming from another country, what I noticed is that here in the States, people want people that they know where they're going. And if you want to be a leader, you just need to show that you know where you're going, and people will follow. And when we talk about leaderless organizations, I really don't believe there's a leaderless organization. They just follow people who know where they're going, whether they proclaim themselves that they're leaders or not leaders, or there's not an organization. And I think I've done well in my companies acting that way, not even knowing that I knew the most of that. You know what I'm saying?
I do.
Just
yeah, what you're talking about is the thing that matters is my ability to persuade other people, not my job title or my official position in the organization or the amount of money I have, or you just said that anyone who can convince other people to let them lead is a leader.
Yeah.
Right? Think about that. Anyone who can convince is a leader. I mean, you always thought you had to be reasonably articulate and convincing, but you also knew at the end of the day you're in charge, right? He's saying that he's seen that you can be the leader simply by saying it in a powerful and persuasive way.
The reason why I'm saying is because people in my organization know way much more than I do. Seriously, if I had to.
And they're glad you recognize that.
And, yeah, but we're better engineers, better architects, but I think I have enough to do something different.
Yeah.
And so you don't need to be the best of the best. You have to just know how to deal with people.
Well, being good at leading is a specialized expertise, different than being good at engineering or, good at some of these things these other people in your organization are good at. You also bring up a really good point, which is a lot of the research that's been done on this is not global research. It's U.S.-based research. So we're going to see some differences, and we don't know what those are yet, I don't think. I think it doesn't mean it doesn't apply, but I think it means it's really not as well thought out in a global context as it is in a U.S. context. Yeah, great point. So the joining an organization should increase my connections and knowledge, not constrain them. So when I join your company should connect me to the outside world, not keep me from connecting to the outside world. You should be sending me to that industry trade show. You should not mind that I'm in that Facebook group with 5 competitors. You should, this job should broaden my horizons. This organization should broaden my horizons. This religious group can't tell me what I should and shouldn't hear. they can direct my belief system and tell me what they think is a good thing for me to believe, and I can choose to affiliate with that, but not the restriction of access to people and information. This is kind of a big deal. Do you want to give your example?
Sure. So I was telling Heather during the break, one of my sons, so we're members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, one of my sons has disaffiliated himself, and his issue is that the church does not have transparent finances. That's his only issue. It's not doctrinal. There's no other concern. And I've really struggled to understand that, but in the context of what we talked about this morning, it makes sense because he has so many options of groups that he can be part of that it's important to him to have transparency, and the church doesn't, so he doesn't want to be part of it. And I don't fully still understand it, but I can sense the root of what's going on in his mind.
It's kind of an organizational issue rather than a doctrinal issue.
Correct.
And from the perspective of a religious group not publishing the salaries of the top leaders, a lot of times we view that kind of thing as efficiency, right? They weren't viewing it as a lack of transparency. You don't think they set out to, let's have a lack of transparency. They were viewing it as a need to know. This is relevant for the administration of this part of the church organization, and other people don't need to know. Well, need to know is kind of an outdated concept in the world of organizing, because anything anybody wants to know, they feel like they should be able to know. And this need to know concept is being challenged, which means there's a whole lot of time needing to be spent helping people process information, right? When the more information people have, the more time you spend with them helping them process it and figure out how they can work together effectively with this broader worldview. It's time you maybe didn't have to spend before. And in organizations, special forces, where there really is a need to know, right? It's very institutional and central, and the need to know is bounded to the set of things you need to know. I don't know how that kind of institutional paradigm, which is even stronger than the corporate need to know paradigm, will play out in these changing trends. I don't know. All right, so let's move on to what does it mean for the workplace. This trend spotting is useful and theoretical, but we live in a practical world where we're doing things every day with employees in our business in order to thrive. I think one of the things that I've seen about what this means for the workplace is that it doesn't mean that business can't continue to thrive. It doesn't mean that certain segments of the population will never want to play. And, this leads us to this discussion of what people want and don't want from their organizations. What are we finding in the organizational research about what people want and what they don't want? Well, there's some good news here first. Individuals still want, in many ways, what we thought they always wanted, which is connection. They still want connection. They still want to be part of something. They still want to do something, to be around people who love them, people who get them. They still want to be supported. They still want to be supporting. They still want they still want other people in their lives. Initially, all the studies on Facebook in organizational communication were like, nobody really connects with each other anymore. This is all just a surface and shallow thing. But what they've realized is that this is a craving for connection. This is not a resistance of connection. People still want to be connected, which is good news for people like us who are connecting people together to accomplish a particular thing, in my mind. They also still want to do the right thing, meaning they still want to make a difference. They still have their work they want to have their work matter. They want to work hard. They want to achieve. They still want, we'll go back, they still want to have their daily effort make a difference to other people. So they're not resisting the concept of working in our businesses with us, right? People in society with this anti-institutionalism that we're seeing, this is not anti-human. This is anti-institutional. Meaning that they just don't like the structures in some ways that institutions have imposed on them. They also want a couple things that might be considered new. They want social consciousness. Now, social consciousness, I realize, is not new, but this new awareness of social consciousness, which is that other people should succeed too. So there's kind of a shift from cooperative to competitive, meaning that a message that we as a company are better than everyone else is not as well received as a message we as a company have joined with these other organizations to make this great change in the world. It's a shift. Does it mean you don't have culture and you don't have organizational solidarity? Well, no. It's not that black and white, but it means that your culture better connect to something broader than just you and your organization and these people, because they want everyone to be successful. They want to support important causes. And an important cause is not earning a living necessarily. It's not the only important cause. They want everyone to earn a living, not just them. They want everyone to have financial success. And I say they, it's really us, because we're all part of this society. You know, as a business leader, you sometimes maybe feel like it's the rest of the world and the people in charge of businesses, especially when we're sitting in a CEO group like this. But we are part of this society. You know, we want others to do well too. I'm not saying we're not competitive. I'm just saying there's a shift where the group in which I feel part of is broad. And that has to do maybe with the multiple memberships that people have now. That might have to do with the fluidity of particular organizations and the fact that my one affiliation might be gone tomorrow, but I'm still part of the broader society. They also want personal growth, personal development. You know, they want it zealously. You know, we as a society want personal growth in ways that are consuming. We are searching. Maybe it's the world of omnipresent search engines, but we are continually searching for new information about things, and we are overloaded in many ways with information, but yet we're still sifting through it, trying to know things. People want to be better individually. Now, is that new? Have they always wanted to be better individually? Well, you could argue that we've always wanted to be better individually, but this priority on my individual growth versus some of these other institutional commitments in my life is what is shifting. They want to learn new things. They want to develop and discover identity. Let's talk about Sadie and Kenzie. These are my two daughters, two of my daughters. Sadie is 7 and Kenzie is 19. You already know more about Kenzie than you want to from the previous conversation we've had. But my daughters are like clones of each other. So whenever I can't get the 7-year-old to behave, the 19-year-old can advise me properly, and she can tell me what the 7-year-old is thinking. So one time when the 7-year-old was 4 or 5, she misbehaved. Has that ever happened to you? Probably not. She misbehaved, and she was really nasty to me. She said some really ornery things, and she just was a little brat. And I said, "Don't you talk to your mother that way." Have any of you ever said that to your children? Don't you talk to your mother that way. That's not appropriate. Well, that didn't change her behavior at all. She just kept doing her thing, and I was faced with the swat you and put you in the corner, or deal with the fact that you just talked to me like that, or come up with some other alternative. So my other daughter, who I think was probably, well, she would have been a very smart 16-year-old at the time, because all 16-year-olds are very, very smart, and she's no exception. She said, "Want me to take a stab at it?" Sure. Knock yourself out. So she gets down on her knees in front of Sadie, and she says, "Sadie, do you want to be the kind of girl who is mean? Or do you want to be the kind of girl who is nice?" Sadie goes, "I want to be nice." And Kenzie says, "Well, the way you just talked to Mommy wasn't how you want to be then." "Sorry, Mommy. I won't do that again." I could have fallen on the floor. What just happened there? What just happened is that Kenzie appealed to her identity, and I appealed to her role. I appealed to her role in the family institution. You, as a child, have this role in the family institution. You are supposed to behave this way. I am the mother and I have this role and I am supposed to behave this way, and you failing to do this is jeopardizing the whole institution. You're making me a bad mother here. You're ruining what's supposed to happen in our family harmony. You're derailing this institutional purpose. I didn't know I was saying all those things. I was just saying, don't mistreat me, you brat. But really, that's what I was saying. That's a role-based conversation. Role is about how do I relate to other people in an organization. Role is about how do I relate to other people in an organization. Identity is about who I am. Identity is what society wants to talk about, not role. They don't want to be told their organizational responsibility. They want to tell you who they are and together work with you to find a way they can contribute because they want to connect with you and they want what they do to matter. Interesting. So they're reflexive and sharing about this too. So personal growth is about developing identity, and we're really as a society much more comfortable reflecting on that with others. That's part of our connection that we want with other people. So far, these things that they want, I'm saying, okay, as a CEO, I can see that my organization can accommodate those things. Okay, I can pay more attention to identity instead of role. I can, offer more opportunities for personal growth. I can connect us to bigger social consciousness. It's the things that we don't want anymore that might be causing trouble in business. We don't want secrets. Transparency, right? That's the side of it that doesn't have the information. We don't call it transparency when we're the ones with the information, but they don't want secrets. They think that all information should be public. We've talked about that a lot. They don't like others knowing something they don't, even if they didn't need to know it. They just don't like the idea that other people know things they don't. They're suspicious of information hoarders, a.k.a. CEOs. Are you information hoarders? Sometimes I'm an information hoarder. And they don't want lectures on roles and duties. We talked about roles as we talked about identity. They don't like being told where they fit relative to others. Now, I kind of view an organizational chart as comforting, right? It's clarity. Who does what? What's your role in the organization? How do organizational charts relate in a world where people don't want to focus on roles? They want to focus on identity. Should we just dissolve them? Let's don't have organizations. Let's never put out an organizational chart. What do you think?
Well, I think if you manage to that, it might work. But you've got to change your whole thought process.
Yeah.
So we actually did that in our organization. In fact, when we went public, we had the CEO, everybody else, and the CFO beneath everybody else.
So you flattened it, and you put the CEO at the bottom.
We said the CFO responds to everyone else. So just kind of a unique approach. But what's interesting is then we had a change of CEO, and people kept doing exactly what they had morphed into doing anyway, but now they just had a name. So the same way a leadership-less organization still had leadership,
Yeah.
we still had the same thing going on, it just didn't have a formal name.
But it doesn't always feel authentic to employees when we downplay the organization. Oh, well, we just won't hand out the org chart, and we'll make an org chart that has, the CEO underneath everybody else. But it's a step, right? It's a step toward recognizing that roles in an organization might not always be the asset in people's minds that we thought it was. That organizational position, though super useful for efficiency, is a counter to individual freedom of identity development. You may not see it that way, but many others are starting to see it that way. So one of the things we've done is we have an org chart, but we don't publish it or post it. They have to ask for it if they want it. Whether that's the right answer, who knows? But we have also made org charts with functions versus job titles, because that's a little bit more. This is what the identity of this department is and what they can offer you, right? Versus this is the hierarchical relationship of this person to you. So.
Could I ask a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, go.
Chris.
Well, and maybe you said this earlier, but it would be helpful to rehear it. Could you put some more definition around they? Is it
Yeah.
all employees?
Yeah, that
it
is great.
Of a certain age, or like what's the?
Yeah, I actually have a slide on this a little bit later. I didn't talk about it yet, but let's talk about it now because I think it's relevant. So, organizational research certainly finds differences in ages and, geographic country of origin and various other factors affect how we work together. So I'm not saying age is irrelevant. I am saying, though, I will say that these trends do not seem to be specific to, say, millennials. They do not seem to be age specific. The conversation about them kind of centers on millennials sometimes as a flashpoint because millennials are not used to some of the institutional things that an older generation takes for granted as the way things are, right? And so that doesn't, the organizational research is kind of showing that across the board, people are behaving with these organizational practices. That 50-year-olds are joining multiple groups, not just 20-year-olds, and that organizational fluidity exists for across the age strata. But for a millennial, they are more likely to make it a public conversation. They are more likely to say, this isn't how it has to be. Whereas the other age groups are more likely to chafe quietly about it, right? And so I am not finding it to be a millennial thing, kids these days. I am certainly seeing it in kids these days, but I'm seeing it in 50-year-olds. I'm seeing it in an older population than that. I'm seeing it across the board. And my primary research, in fact, was with 40 and 50-year-olds that's initiated this thought process. So I don't think it's age specific, which might have in some ways been what you were asking. Yeah, is that what you were asking?
Well, that's what I used as a. Yeah, I was just curious. Definition period.
Yeah, it's an under-researched topic, to be truthful, because
it sounds
there's.
like you're saying all employees, basically.
I am saying that all society. It actually, the part that's under-researched is the part applying it to business, right? The part that's getting to be fairly well-researched, at least in a U.S. context, is the part about organizing practices in society. What people are and aren't doing with government, with religion, with business as one of those, with classrooms and schooling. And my data comes from those other organizational contexts. And across those organizational contexts, there's a span of ages that are represented. And it doesn't seem specific to a certain economic group or a certain racial group or anything
It's
like
how
that.
they react to it, whether or not they're public or stew on it.
How they react to it is more visible in a younger generation, in most instances. So the application of these ideas to business is a new space for organizational research. And that's why, in some ways, we're kind of figuring out together. We have some practical tips here, but yeah, somebody.
I had a question.
Oh, yeah.
Oscar, do you want to go
I'll go first.
So I used to, I had a lot of success explaining or encouraging people to understand how they're, and I used to use the word role, but maybe I should have used purpose because it did resonate, but how they fit into the success of the organization as a whole, how important their position is. But probably the semantic would be your purpose versus
Well, how important you are.
Yes.
How important
Yeah.
you are to the people around you.
Well, but in this case, it was like our customer care department. That was our core strategic advantage, is that we would be good to work with. And so we needed the whole organization to understand that how important they were to the success of the company.
Yeah.
Is that,
So
it seemed to work back, well, it didn't work.
let's talk about the difference between a systems approach versus an institutional approach to working with people. So a systems approach is about how I fit in a broader system, meaning when I do this, it causes you to do this. These are the levers we pull with each other. This is our interaction does this, right? This is the system. This is how the machine functions. This thing does this and this thing does this. That concept of systems is not what people are resisting. Institutions is this concept that someone in an authority position has declared how we should work together and what my contribution should be and what role I play in relation to you. right? So explaining that the customer service function fits into the system in this way and is super important, and even having the employee explain to you how they fit into the system versus explaining to them, that's really important. But have the employee explain to you how they fit into the system. People like to fit into the system. Remember, they're craving connection. This is not anti-systems or anti-connection. It's anti-institutional, which is different.
Have you noticed in your research that sometimes that groups that I'm going to talk about millennials a little bit.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
I have a son that is our operations manager. He's a millennial.
Okay.
And he's actually making changes in our organization that we feel that is good, but we fought it for about a year. But have you noticed that a specific group can manage and change an organization even beyond of what the leadership of the organization will want to do? And have you seen a result, whether it's positive or negative? Because we're going through that transition right now, and it's very, very different for especially for me and my partner. We both were born same year, 61, graduated at the same time and everything else, and all our employees are 30 and less.
Mm-hmm.
And so...
Right. Let's ask the Wayfair CEOs how they feel about the 500 employee signed petition yesterday saying they shouldn't sell bedding to the immigration camps at the border. That form of organizing, I mean, it'll all work out, because what Wayfair will do is they'll come along and they'll say, we're going to create a huge initiative to, donate resources and money, and our employees can donate their time to further the condition of the children at the border, and it will work out probably in positive ways for the organization. But it probably feels disruptive today to the Wayfair executives. Millennials, are millennials better at enlisting their peers to cause change in an institution? Maybe. I mean, they're more used to, that's a native model for them. Enlisting the peers is a native model, where it's something that the rest of us have come to as we've been participating in this society. So, I mean, it would make sense to me that they would be better at doing it quicker and more instinctively, and it makes sense to me that it would be both positive and negative for institutions. I don't know. It's a good question.
Just the only thing is just my partner and I talked about it. Are we losing that grasp, and are we, based on our experience, is that something that we want to do? But we had 3 partners before. We had to actually buy one partner out because it did not go with what the census of the whole entire group did. And it was, we either lose the company, we start the company, or we continue the company, which was very interesting for us. Still, we're brand new, and what you're talking about is kind of makes sense, but I don't know our results. So, do you have in your research? Do you have companies that have gone through this and you see an outcome, or are you still just going through the research of this?
Yeah. So, in a wildly unsatisfying way, I can tell you that I have 20 years of practical experience working with a variety of CEOs and running companies, and then I have added to it 7 years of study and research on this topic of individuals and groups and how they work together. And I have lots of data from the research populations I have studied, which are not corporations. So, wildly unsatisfying. I do not have, here's 5 examples of companies that have done this. I'm hoping you have some examples, and I have an example of my company that has done this. But you're talking about a challenge where some people in your organization did things that actually risked the life of your organization, right? You're saying you had to buy out this partner. They wanted you to go a direction you didn't go. Well, I mean, the stakes are high. And that is an organizational issue I'm sure it had other components to it as well.
Is that part of your issue that you thought would bring up today?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was.
So we can get back to that.
Uh-huh.
It's a great question. And, like most areas of research, it gets us thinking. It asks the questions, but it doesn't answer them all. So, identity versus role, we've talked about that. An obligation or duty to an organization not as important as an obligation to society as a whole. We've talked about that. So here, what they really, 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 really don't want might be a bigger issue than what they want, or what they still want, what they newly want, and what they don't want. They really, really, really don't want participation-based metrics. They want results-based metrics. So that means all versions of age, longevity, attendance, I showed up on time or I didn't. It's not important because those participation-based things are organizational, related to my role. They're not identity related to who I am, right? They are about whether I convenienced or inconvenienced someone around me, and whether I convenienced or inconvenienced the institution. Now, we might argue that that's not necessarily what they're about, but that's the paradigm that's out there. So a focus on results. So I realize this is under what they don't want, and it says they want to focus on results, but this is what they do want. They don't want a participation-based metric. They do want a focus on results, and they'll opt out if there's not progress or results. They want
results for the organization or results for themselves?
Both. They primarily for themselves, to be perfectly honest. Primarily, the organization exists to serve me. Is what I'm doing mattering? Is it working? Am I progressing and growing? But also, is it mattering to other people? Because I care about connection, right? So is this cause that I'm part of? Because remember now, the institution of the corporation is reframed as connecting to broader causes. So is the cause I'm supporting working, and my way of supporting it by helping this organization, is it working? So they care about results for the organization. They care about results for them too. You know, how many of your employees really pay a lot of attention to how their current job affects their career? Whether the title they have will be good on their resume, whether this will be a stepping stone to the next thing, whether they'll have the visibility in the industry that they want, right?
They want that role, so why do they care about the title on their resume?
Right. It's an interesting contradiction.
It's like
Yeah, it's an interesting contradiction.
Well, because they have to live in the world that's going to judge them for their potential.
But they're trying to
based
change
on
the
that.
world.
Yeah. Pardon?
Yeah.
They're trying to change those.
Yeah.
But they still have to live
And we still have to live in it.
survive in that.
And that's why this is about workplace freedom and about maximizing individual freedom without dismantling the organization. It's not about completely steering all the way toward individual freedom and ignoring the needs of the organization. It's just about not having an institutional mindset towards individual freedom. So they really, 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 really don't want inequality, meaning that they dislike visible signs of difference, such as power, money, office, box on the org chart. Getting ahead of others is not, I shouldn't say it's not a motivator, I actually changed this on a later slide, is not the same degree of motivator it might have been in the past. Because we're still competitive at some level, but we almost feel a little bit embarrassed being competitive. Like in the last group, someone asked me, well, do you do team recognition or individual recognition? Because I feel a little stupid I think this person was writing a newsletter and he's saying, I feel a little stupid calling out people's names for successes they've had. I'm not sure that's well received. Well, that's an organizational issue, right? That's about whether he should be recognizing the whole team or whether he should be recognizing the individual group. If you recognize individuals, what does the team think? If you recognize the team, what does the individual who did more on the team think? Right? What?
Was there a cycle, so let's say pre-World War I, in terms of how organizations function versus, are we on this pendulum journey where right now we're
Probably.
going towards this sort of super transparent public, like people want all this, what I'll call selfishness in many ways.
Yeah.
And then eventually we're going to hit the wall that's not working, and so now the pendulum's going to swing. It seems like we've started here. Is there anything pre-existing that?
Yeah, so I don't know what we're going to do in the future, but I can tell you in the past, institutionalism got its start after World War II in the United States with the rise of large assembly line corporations, with this sense of, the role of government in people's lives. Like institutionalism kind of has its roots, as we know it now, in that time period. And then, of course, there were some challenges to institutionalism in the 70s with, the societal trends going on there with the racism and the feminist arguments and the civil rights of all forms and the opposition to the Vietnam War and those kinds of things. And then companies seem to have swung to a new institutionalism that's not called that, but that is still quite centralized. It just acknowledges that there's more information flowing, right? So, I mean, it's definitely been a cycle. I don't know where it'll go in the future. I mean, it could dissolve into some form of anarchy. But I think what we as business people will probably see is we'll see that if we do a better job of honoring workplace freedom, the workplace will still exist as we know it. Right? That's my theory. What society will do, we'll see. So what we do, one of the compromises I've seen with do you recognize teams or individuals is I've seen that if you give monetary bonuses, gift cards or rewards, you do it for the team, and if you're praising, you praise individually, right? So you might list somebody, you know, you bring the whole team up and you say, here's your rewards team, good job getting this software conversion done, and you know, Joe, you really did a fabulous job doing XYZ, right? So the praise is private and the monetary recognition is group. It's one compromise. They don't think it's fair to judge others, and they don't want to be judged. So performance reviews are a form of judgment, right? An established institutional corporate form of judgment. And they don't want to be judged. So does that mean we throw out performance reviews? We don't care if they perform. We don't care if we talk about whether they perform. We don't care if they know whether we think they're performing.
Well, it's that they want focus on results. To me, if you're giving the feedback on results faster, then you can get rid of the performance.
Yeah, what were you going to say?
Yeah, basically the same thing, and we're kind of moving in our organization to that trend. We're Xing out the quarterly performance evaluation, really is what it was, and having more of those weekly one-on-ones, and where it is more individually focused, it's what are your struggles, what are your successes, how can I support you,
Yeah, so this doesn't say they don't want to judge themselves. It says they don't want you to judge them.
Right, so you ask them the question.
Yeah, they want to sit down with you and engage in a discussion about how cool or not cool they are, because they want your attention, they want your connection, they want to be part of this. They just don't want you to tell them how they're doing. Employees want to tell you how they're doing. They want to tell you what their contribution is and can be. They want, I had an employee say to me the other day, it feels like this organizational change we made, we made it because people think I'm terrible. And I said, are you terrible? He was like, I said, well, do you think you are? Well, no, I think I'm good at this and this and this. I said, I agree. I've seen some really great successes in those areas. And I just sat there. And then he said, well, I think I need to learn more about this and this. I said, oh, how would you do that? How would you go about learning more about that? It was a whole different conversation than whether the organization was judging him. Right? He wanted to engage in that conversation after he got over the initial shock of my asking him if he was terrible. But he did get over it. Right. Okay. Questions or comments about that before we move on to some practical principles? Do you want to take a break here?
Yeah, I think it's a good time let's just do 5 minutes this time. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's good. We have an hour left,
Perfect.
right?
Yeah.
Places. Some handouts we're going to use for this section. You can approach these handouts any way you want. You can tune me out completely and start reading them cover to cover. You can say I'm taking these home. You can say I'll reference them when Heather tells me to reference them. You may do this any way that works for you, because I can't teach a session on workplace freedom and tell you exactly how you have to interact with my handouts. It just seems wrong. But they are there for your reference. And if you want them digitally, let me know afterwards, and I'll give you a packet that has the slides and the handouts on the packet. Okay, so we're just going to go through these 6 principles and talk about some examples. We have talked about some examples along the way, and I'm hoping you will share some examples as you think of them. But I'll share some examples of what we have done at Teton Sports and what I have done with others in my consulting career. Teton Sports was founded by someone who has freedom and independence as a core value at the center of his being. So long before I entered the scene on Teton Sports, 4 years ago, I started consulting with them while I was in school, and I've been the president for a year. Long before I entered the scene, the company was way more free than you're used to seeing in corporate environments, right? So I have codified some of that. I have noticed what we're doing and pointed it out and written it down in some ways that didn't exist before. But I didn't start this, and my HR director has also been a big part of working on this. I think all the employees have, and what I'm going to talk to you works in unevenly across the organization, meaning that some employees might hear this. I have 2 employees here. We could pick on them. Some employees might hear this and say, oh, yeah, that's exactly how Teton works. And some employees might hear this and say, yeah, my department doesn't quite work like that. I know that. You know that. We're rolling this stuff out, and you'll be doing this too. And uneven results are still results. They just don't have to be perfect in order for us to be making progress toward the things we care about. So the first principle of workplace freedom. This is on your pretty little infographic, which, by the way, I created in about 10 minutes at canva.com. So if you've never created your own cool little infographic and you want to, that will be what you take away from this session, canva.com. And the first principle here, don't regulate time and space. And what I mean is be intentional about your regulation of time and space. You're still going to regulate it. There's still going to be a need to get shifts covered, a need to have customers attended to at a certain time frame, whatever. But a lot of times in the corporate world, especially the institutional corporate world, we have regulated time and space by default. We set a start time, we set an end time, we tell people where to be, we tell them how they progress through their career, which is a virtual time and space regulation. At 6 months you do this, at 1 year you do this, at 2 years you do this, at 5 years you do this. Did anyone get their Vistage 5-year award today? Yes, that's a regulation of time and space, meaning that it's recognizing our progression through time and space in a standard way. So I'm not saying don't regulate time and space, even though I am saying that on the infographic. But offer less regulation of time and space didn't really fit on the graphic. So we started with don't regulate time and space. So here is an example from our employee handbook. I'll let you read that. I won't read it to you. Take a minute and read it. So our employee handbook says that our attendance policy is that employees will manage. We expect employees to manage their attendance in ways that do not unduly convenience others with whom they work. Our facility closure policy is that the facility is closed 8 days a year. And though Teton may recognize the above closure days, this does not mean that employees cannot work on that day, or that they must take the day off, or they cannot take another day as the day off instead. This is up to the employees and the immediate supervisor. If the employees choose to work on a closure day, he or she is paid at the regular pay rate. Employee handbook is the most difficult place to implement flexible policies about time and space because it's a legal document, right? It's the lawyers review the handbook. The handbook is where you cover your butt liability-wise and you spell out everything that needs to happen and what they're supposed to do. And time and space is a big thing we have always spelled out for our employees. I'm paying you for 40 hours, you better be here for 40 hours, right? It says it in there. Well, in my handbook, there is a section where they have to report their hours. And we have already said we expect them. They have to report their hours because of government requirements. I actually do not require them to report their hours, but I have to require it for certain government reasons. I'm pretty flexible in how they can apply their hours, but it's not easy to reconcile the typical liability-based way we manage employees with the need for maximizing individual freedom and still achieving productivity out of maximizing individual freedom. And I can tell you, the one thing I can for sure tell you about Teton is that the individual freedoms we give people result in great productivity. I will tell you as a case study, we do not have a productivity problem. Now, we're not huge, we're not in every industry, we're not you necessarily, but a case study applied intentionally, freedoms like this can definitely increase productivity. Here's our vacation leave policy. Employees do not have a designated amount of vacation leave. They are permitted to take paid leave when they need to, as long as the needs of the business are also taken into consideration and employees are communicating closely with their supervisors and teams. You cannot accrue nor lose vacation time, nor can it be cashed out because there's no vacation currency. There's no bank of vacation hours. So we're in the process of working on a vacation checklist that the employee does before they leave. And in my company, we strongly encourage employees to tell us when they need to be gone, not ask us if they can go. So if I have 2 employees who are gone the end of next month for a couple-week period, and they're the 2 key people who work on our biggest account, right? And so the most organized of them told me a couple of months ago she was going to be gone, and I said, so what are you doing about the account while you're gone? And she said, well, I don't know. I said, well, what are you doing about your customer service stuff while you're gone? She said, I don't know, because she manages the customer service team, and one of the customer service people is related to her and is also going with her. So that's complicated. And then she came back about a week or 2 later and said, all right, here's my preliminary plan. I'm thinking of talking to this person in the organization and doing this and telling the account this and taking the live chat off the website for this period of time and doing these things. And I said, it's a good plan. Have you talked to your team about it? Have you talked to the other account person about it? And now it turns out the other account person wants to be gone too. So now I'm telling them, how are you going to reconcile this? How are you going to resolve it? I am not managing this for them. I have a calendar where they're required to put when they're gone. And I reference that calendar for my convenience. We all do, so that we can see who's going to be in and who's going to be out and what they're going to be doing. But I don't know her world. I can't manage her world. So I don't have a vacation request form. I have a policy that you as an employee are responsible to communicate effectively about your vacation to customers, to coworkers, to your manager, to anybody who could be expecting something from you. You are responsible for communicating effectively. And if you need my help, I'll help you with that. If you need me to craft something to a coworker because they don't work for you and you're not as comfortable with it or whatever, I can help you with that, but not unless you ask me to.
So if you got anyone to tell you that they're leaving for a month or 2 months?
Yeah, so far they underuse their vacation, not overuse it. In the last session I was in, somebody said, yeah, I had a hard time in hiring somebody recently because he just could not get on board with my 2-week vacation policy. And he's like, everywhere I've ever been, I've had unlimited vacation. I can't live with the 2-week vacation policy. And he ended up hiring the person, and the person agreed to live with it. He gave the person more time. That's what it was. He gave the person like a 4-week vacation policy, and the person never used more than 2. Right? They never went forever. I find that if people are really engaged in what they're doing and they feel responsible for the results of what they're doing, right? Linda feels like if she leaves town and this Amazon account falls down, that's on her. Like, she feels really responsible for that. She's way more worried about her being gone for 2 weeks than I am, right? Because she doesn't want that to blow up.
I think the vacation policy, or classic view of it, is kind of outdated. Because the reality is, I think for most of our results-oriented employees, they go on vacation. It's really not vacation. They're just not in the office every day,
taking a break.
and they're not scheduled in all the meetings that they're normally in, and they're not doing all the routine because they're with their family or they're somewhere else. But they're still looking at the results. I mean, I think they still check in. They still check email. They still are.
And you bring up a really good point. In the fluid workplace, where work and home lines are very blurry, right? And this is... My company, this is intentional. Like 2/3 of my company works remotely and 1/3 of my company works in the office because they have determined that the jobs they do need to be done in the office, right? I had Austin, you'll think this is funny. So Austin's supervisor came to me when we did some talking about workplace freedom, and he came to me and said, so my team is an in-office team. Can you help me understand how we can apply freedom the way some of these other teams can apply it? Because if they just want to go and go to their kid's soccer game in the afternoon, they do it, and my team is in the office. And I said, well, why is your team in the office? I'm not making them be in the office. There's just rock silence. He said, well, they're in the office because they need to work together. I said, what do they need to work together on? Well, it's a creative team. They do video and audio production and graphic design, and we're brainstorming and collaborating together a lot. I said, so do you do that at designated times? Is that a super important part of your job? Yeah, I actually think it's the fun of the job. Like, I think it's a really important part of the job to be able to interact with each other in this way, and I think if we don't do it, we're not as creative. I said, well, do you need to do it all the time? well, no, a lot of times we're just sitting at our desks working on video editing or something like that. I said, so does that need to be done in the office? Well, the equipment is big and expensive, and it can't be done on a laptop. I couldn't transport it back and forth. So it would have to be done, we'd have to set up a whole nother location of equipment somewhere else for them to do it. And then they could never do it in the office. I'm like, so what makes sense for your team? Well, okay, I'm gonna think about this. And I think he went and talked to the team. I don't know, they talked about hours they needed to be there to work together. I'm not exactly sure the outcome, and I don't think the outcome is necessarily final or smooth yet. But the concept that I was not making his team be in the office was eye-opening to him, even in a company where we emphasize these freedom things all the time. Right? And he came back and he was like, they need to be in the office for these 2 reasons. I said, well, what if they want to leave to go to their kid's soccer game? Or what if, do they have to come in at a certain time? And he said, well, I feel better if they do. I said, I acknowledge that. I'm okay that you feel better if they come in the office at a certain time. Does it mean that they need to? And he said, well, I'm going to get with them, and we're going to figure out together what the time is to come in, which I think is what happened. And so they agreed together on the times they were going to be in the office and the core hours. And I said, well, be sure you're giving them the flexibility they need. If they need to leave to do something, I said, do you feel like anybody on your team is underperforming, meaning that they're not delivering enough results or the right results? And he said, in this particular case, he said, well, yeah, this one person in this one area. And I said, well, you should fix that, because having him be in the office isn't the answer to fix that. So let's figure out how to fix that. Right? We were kind of trying to focus. He didn't know how to do this. It's not normal. Right? It's not normal for institutions. But it's okay to operate in a world that's not normal. We have a Flex Fridays policy. You can... Well, I'll read you the quick highlights. So basically, I believe you're all really super hardworking. So there's a message of trust, and they are super hardworking, and they work around the clock in many cases. And so I want to formally designate Friday afternoons as flex time. If you're finished with your work for the week, or you simply ready to take a break before you kick back on Saturday, because we have many employees who choose to work on Saturdays, then Friday afternoons is the time you can disappear. We receive few customer and factory queries at this time. Your disappearance should not inconvenience anybody. Take the night off, take the afternoon off. This includes closing the warehouse after shipments go out. The exception to this will be formal meetings that we schedule, or don't. Flex Fridays was very well received for office people and non-office people. And it was great. I had one employee say to me, I love Flex Fridays because she's a work-from-home employee who does some things with customers and orders, and the internal people she deals with always need things from her. So she tries really hard to be always available to them, but they all work different hours, and so she felt like she's on all the time. She said, I love Flex Fridays because I can just turn off my phone and not feel guilty that I'm not answering. That's a new kind of workplace, right? All right. We're not going to have discussion. Sorry, we've had some. We'll go back to it again, but we're skipping that discussion. So, principles, not rules. Principles, not rules is the next key principle on this pretty little sheet. And this has a lot to do with this point down here, internal moral compass rather than external behavior constraints. Now, do we never constrain our employees' behavior external? I mean, I do. The customer service shifts have to be covered. The warehouse has to be available for people to pick up shipments. I said to the warehouse, what do you want your will call hours to be? I didn't tell the warehouse what their will call hours should be, but I have to have some rules. I have to have some things that I feel strongly about. Well, here's the trick. Rules about how to communicate with each other, emphasize those. Be the hard nose about rules about communication. So rules about reporting of metrics, results. You have to report results to me at a certain time. You can tell me how you report them, but the fact that you have to communicate with me about results weekly, I get to specify, right? Because people in this new world of anti-institutionalism, they want connection, but they do not know how to achieve it. So the part they struggle the most with is how to communicate with people around them. So that's the part they're actually least resistant to rules, right? Least resistant to rules. Like when you go on vacation, you are required to tell these 5 people who you work with every day what your plan is. That's a communication rule, right? Versus a rule about your space and time. So communication rules are usually better received than other kinds of rules. And like I require my employees to have a quarterly checkup, which means they have to self-assess on a form, and then they have to schedule an appointment with their manager and talk through that form with their manager. And the form is, how did I do, and what do I need from my manager, and what am I going to work on? What are we going to focus on this quarter? I require them to do that form, and I require them to have that meeting. I'm requiring communication. My rule is that you do this checkup. But it's a different kind of rule than the rules institutions used to make, which is very, very tightly controlled, policy-oriented rules. The first example, with the little one in the corner, the first example is a newsletter article from our internal newsletter, where I was getting employees saying, well, because I work from home, I work all the time, maybe Teton's taking advantage of me. And it's my answer to that, which is, I'm not making these rules. You want to succeed here. I'm not requiring you to work certain times, So the Tetonian is an example of the principle of self-management. I am saying to them, you're responsible to stop work too, not just to start work. I'm expecting you, because you told me this is important to you, to work hard and do a good job. And you told me this is who you are and this is important to you. So I am expecting you to do that. But I am also expecting you to tell me when that's too much, when you need to have a life. So you own stopping work and starting work. You don't just own one side of it. I'm not going to tell you to stop work. I'm going to support you if you choose to stop it. Every time you come to me and said, I need to renegotiate this deadline, or this thing, I can't get it done, I need additional help, I need additional resources. Well, I work to support you in that, but I'm not going to tell you when you need help. You tell me. So this newsletter article is a formal example of that. And of course, then we talked about the identity and roles with this daughter. A core values exercise for principles. So if you take away from this anything about rules, it's that rules to help them communicate, and a strong emphasis on developing their internal character, developing their internal moral compass, their internal desire to do the right thing, and their self-awareness of whether what they're doing is right in their moral world, their world of ethics and what they care about. So core values play a role in this, and core values is kind of, in my mind, the corporate America's institutional response to this anti-institutionalism. We've been saying, well, people need purpose. We'll get values. We'll get core values. Core values is a great way to begin being purpose-driven as an organization, since people are aligning by purpose. But it's also a great opportunity to develop moral compass, right? Activities that actually have people engage with a particular value. Our performance review, our checkups, they're not called performance review at our company. Our checkups have a question that is like, which of the core values is the biggest problem for you and why? Which of the core values do you really feel aligned with and why? Give us an example. Share with us a time when you struggled to apply a core value. Those kinds of things. It's all about learning and personal growth in their internal sense. It's the idea that you have some success as a business person controlling them because you're in charge and they work for you, but that is what is changing in society, and so you will have better success over the long haul hiring people who care about the same fundamental things you do, and helping them develop a self-awareness so they can act consistent with what they care about. Does that make sense? Thoughts about that so far? About any of these points so far?
Going back to kind of like the workplace freedom and laying that out, this is a dumb question, but how much of that is in the hiring process versus the actual onboarding process? Is there a way to kind of vet some of those things earlier on in a response that you get in a hiring situation?
Yeah. Well, certainly if we're talking about the organization works because all of these people have identities that don't clash with each other in terms of their personal goals, then you got to figure that out early. So it does need to be in the hiring process. Other people probably have tips on how they've worked this assessment of someone's, not just their ethics or their position on certain values and beliefs, but their self-awareness and ability to make themselves act consistent. So their lack of their amount of self-discipline to believe that they will act in a way that matches their values.
Jesse Beacom talked a lot about that last month in his presentation.
Oh, his hiring process, yeah, is very rigorous.
Make sure you really
like that.
zero in on the values and what's important.
Yeah.
in your process.
Well, and values show up in our interaction with other people. So in the hiring process, lots of questions or exercises that relate to what do you do in this situation? You know, what you tell me about a time that you disagreed with a supervisor and how you worked through that. What you're looking for is not whether they're going to be a pain in the neck as a supervisor, whether they're going to be a pain in the neck as an employee, but you're looking for how self-aware they are. Right? You're looking for how much their behaviors, when they describe them to you, are framed in a principle. Are they saying, well, you know, I really didn't like what my supervisor was doing because I feel like that particular thing he wanted me to do with customers does not treat customers right, does not empower customers. Well, there's a value reveal right there somewhere. You've got to figure out, what does he think customers should get treated like? You know, because there's a value reveal. So when you ask the questions about, you know, tell me about a time when you did this, you know, people who know you well, we hire you, we're going to love you, I'm sure. In 6 months, what are we going to like the very best about you? Right? I'm looking for values. I'm not looking for skills. I'm looking for values with those kinds of questions. Others have thoughts on how they've worked assessment of identity into the company process?
I agree. I think you have to tell stories. You have to get them to tell stories about situational things, and that's where you're going to tease out what they really think. Story.
Yeah. Sometimes we think it doesn't matter. Like I have a colleague who hires really great people who have tremendous skills and says to me things like, I mean, he's a little abrupt for our organization, and, you know, I think he's probably not a long-term fit because, you know, I'm not quite sure what he did previously with some of his customers. And I'm like, oh, wake up. You know, this is going to be a problem because you're not going to be able to just control him. And his approach is very controlling, you know. Well, I mean, it'll be okay because I have rules about what he can do with customers. So he won't do those things here. Well, your rule's only going to take you so far, you know. So personal growth. Zealous about personal growth. This is a principle we talked about a little. We introduced this principle earlier, but be zealous about your employees' personal growth. We have a training program that we're in year 4 of called Jumpstart that literally pays $2,000, up to $2,000, you know, cash or gift cards to employees for completing various parts of the Jumpstart program. And the Jumpstart program, and we also pay for hard costs like books or tuition or whatever. We announce these achievements. This program is completely voluntary, but consistently for 4 years, more than 75, usually closer to 80% of the workplace has participated in the whole program. More have participated in pieces of the program. So it's a very well-received program consistently over the years. It includes lots and lots and lots of personal choice. So, you know, the second example that I've included here is an extract from one of the things we did this year in Jumpstart, which is we had them, the biggest module in Jumpstart was a personal learning plan, where you decide each quarter, you decide what you want to learn that quarter, and you decide what you're going to do each month toward that learning objective. And you talk to somebody, you tell another Teton employee about it, and you do this and that, and so you pick a core value to focus on that quarter, and you just walk yourself through whatever training you have decided. I was a little bit skeptical because this is a little looser than what we've done in the past. Like in the past, it's been, here are 5 activities, pick one, you know, so they get choices. But, you know, design your learning plan for the whole year and walk yourself through it is a little bit advanced. But they're good at it because they've been doing this already for several years now, and they're engaging with it and finding it really valuable. Just as an example of zealousness about learning. And they have to self-report, and they get money for each thing they complete, or each piece of it. They get rewards, and they get gift cards, and they get praise, and, you know, blah, blah, blah. And they know this up front, what money they get or what reward they get financially for doing what piece of it. And, you know, there's arguments in training whether you should give financial rewards for training. And I'm familiar with both sides of those arguments. I've chosen to come down on this side, and it's worked for me. I mean, the pros and cons are that you're just bribing them to do something, and maybe they don't care about it. The pro is that you're bribing them to do something that you care about. That works both sides of that. But I have found that if the training program, if the thing you're bribing them to do is related to communication or personal learning, I have a lot of success bribing them to do it. If it's related to showing up to work on time, I can't bribe my way into that. It doesn't usually work.
So do you, when you say you give $2,000, how many people are using that towards like taking a class as opposed to just taking it and putting it in the bank or like?
So the $250 is to pay for the costs of classes, and the $2,000 is paid usually in gift cards to them. They could choose. Some of them choose to take it in product because we make cool camping product, but. They don't use that money usually for further self-improvement. They use that money to take their family on vacation. They use that money to pay for Christmas. They use that money, like it's fun money for most of them.
What about like someone wants to go get an MBA or something to get their degree or something like that? Is that different than Jumpstart?
Yeah, so our company is so anti-institutional that I had a large argument with the founder about whether paying for an actual college course was a legitimate way to improve learning, because he doesn't think it is. Right? I have a PhD. Have I mentioned that? So this is an area that we did not agree, because he feels so strongly that a course is not about you learning what you need. It's about telling you what you need to learn, and that you want this piece and that piece and that piece, and that'll be valuable for you, and the rest won't. Well, education world is starting to align with him in that, right? The world of education is starting to be a lot more modular and pick and choose, and you can get. So the $250 this year for the first time can be used toward a college course. But he still doesn't like it. All right, unique rewards and pathways. So this is about not making them all move in lockstep fashion, and it's about there are many ways to work successfully. So our part-time employees are allowed to participate in Jumpstart, not just our full-time employees, because there was this perception before that part-time employees don't take their career seriously. So we don't really want to invest in them. They're going to leave. They're not legit. And then I came along and consulted part-time for 3-4 years with this company and made the argument that part-time doesn't mean you're not serious. It means that's the commitment. That's the amount of result you have time to make. So contract, temporary, part-time. Encourage employees to tell you what they want. The bucket list bonus idea. You've heard that probably from other Vistage speakers. The idea that you have them all make a list of things that they want, and then you pick from those lists when you're doing bonuses rather than just have the cash, right? So they get individualized bonuses that are probably worth the same amount of cash. I haven't done that program, but many people testify that bucket list bonuses are a great way to do it, and it plays to this principle of uniqueness. Well, so career ladders and pretty much everything about the HR world of managing employees is about standardizing, right? Career ladders, it's about saying people with this much experience and this much training are in this salary range, and people with this much experience and training are in this salary range, and when they can do these skills, they qualify for this thing. That whole concept of a standardized career ladder is contrary to anti-institutionalism. It also exists in every company, everywhere. So we got to figure out how to reconcile that. And I don't have an easy answer for how to reconcile that, but I have found that rather than emphasizing progression that is time-based or progression that is on my individually with the employee, to say, here's the things I as an employee think qualify me for the next level. And so here's my list of what I think I can do. Manager, comment on my list. Help me with my list. Here's the list of what it takes to be a customer service manager versus a customer service associate. Here's the list of what it takes to get promoted. It's way harder. So I'm not here to tell you that workplace freedom is easier to administer, because it's not. It's not easier. And you don't have to black and white it. I'm not saying go kill all your company career ladders, fire your HR person, start over. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying start somewhere. Start somewhere and recognize that this workplace freedom is important. So this next 3 and 4 in this handout. 3 is the compensation and checkups philosophy that we use. This philosophy document, the important thing to notice on this philosophy document, I'll call your attention to page 2 where it says philosophies about the employment relationship. And then it has a section for individuals and managers and the company. And it says individuals are responsible for their success on the job. Managers are responsible to support them. The company is responsible to provide a system where that can happen. That's basically what it says. So my job as a manager is to help you be successful. Your job as an employee is to figure out how you can be successful and to tell me what I can do to help you. Your success is up to you. And the company's job is to make sure this environment is conducive to that process. It's a systems design job at a company level. Thoughts? The first thought being, apparently it's time for light. We have seen the light. My video guy's like, sorry, Austin, I didn't do the light.
So how individualized is your compensation?
Yeah, it's tricky. We're working through that. Our compensation is a function of market research on salary ranges, individual checkups in these checkup forms, company performance, and a couple of other factors like core values and how we feel this employee and they feel they have demonstrated the core values. And so it's not based straight on market ranges. It's based on a variety of things in market range, because I think a salary range is still a useful tool. I just don't think it drives. So we do still use that, and we do still have some, and we're not huge, as I said, so we haven't had as much pushback on standardizing career ladders. We get a little bit of that. If you think about most of the HR policies that exist in the traditional institutional frame of the corporation are about viewing employees as a liability, a potential liability, and managing the ways in which they could harm you. If they could sue you, if they could steal money from your customer, if they could damage another coworker, like the ways in which employees could harm you. So it's based on a risk management liability analysis structure. And that's how most of the traditional HR world is set up. That's how compensation systems are set up. That's how performance reviews are set up. That's how handbooks are set up. The premise difference is that I believe you are strong and capable, and I am here to empower you and enable you and help you be better, versus I believe if I take my eyes off you, you will harm me. It's a paradigm difference. And in practice, it looks very different in some cases, and it looks the same in some cases, but the paradigm is different, right? So what I'm talking about is thinking about your paradigm of the risk your employees represent versus the value.
So in your check-ins and what, I'm assuming what you're looking for is an employee to become self-aware that I'm not cutting it, I'm not getting it done. Something needs to change. And the change may be opt-out, right? Rather than forced out. It's kind of what I sense.
Employees do opt out in this kind of structure.
So how do you help them opt out? I mean, are you a participant in the opt-out, or like, is it a mutually beneficial, hey, you need to,
Usually it's a mutual decision, and that the employee often drives it. I have numerous examples in my career of employees who said, this isn't working for me, and if it's not working for you as a manager, it's not working for them. So I just encourage them to be a little more vocal about what's working and what isn't, and if it seems unsolvable, then we separate. Now, I have still fired people. I'm not saying don't fire people, but I'm just saying that if you really can create an environment where we engage together and you're telling me what you need and from the system, and I'm helping the system be what you need to succeed, if we're both doing that with good intentions, I'm not likely to sue you and you're not likely to sue me, right? Yeah. We're just likely at some point to say, this part has to change, or this thing isn't working, or whatever. It sounds like a Pollyanna world. As I say this, I'm like, these people are going to think I live in La La Land. I really do manage companies and people. I'm not completely making this up. But it's different than what we have historically done. It's different than what we have historically done, and it's different in mindset. Yeah.
I've seen a lot of examples in bigger companies, for sure, where it's not working for the employee. It's not working for the employer. But then when they get to that point, the employer still has to feel like they're fired. And it is an attitude issue, from our...
Sometimes we do it because we think we have to demonstrate to the other employees that we took care of this problem.
Or express aversion again.
Yeah.
Well, it's that HR oversight, right? I mean, I had a guy that worked for me. Marketing needed to go in a new direction, and I didn't think he was going to get there. I just was candid with him, and I said, "Look, I don't think he's going to get there. I don't think you're really happy here." And we had a very frank conversation. He agreed. We said, "Okay, in the next 90 days, you can have every Friday off, start your job search, but you still need to do this minimal set of work, and we'll just transition this thing, between you and I." And it all worked out. But I still had to. HR came down and said, "Well, I heard you had a conversation." I said, "Yes." Just document it.
Document it.
Are you
Submit
going to
it.
give me weekly updates? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Well, and an employee in the workers' compensation unemployment insurance world is paid differently if you fire them versus if they leave, if it's a voluntary termination or an involuntary termination. The system is set up to make you think of your employees as a liability. It is. That's what the employees are resisting. They can tell. They can tell that the institution thinks they're a liability. They can tell the institution is not respecting their humanity, is not telling them they can grow and not believing and trusting them. Because HR is all it takes as an example of that, right? Because the system is set up to have this be a risk that we manage, right? So this is not a small thing that I'm asking you to do. I know it. I know it's not a small thing. All right, moving on to these last couple principles. So connections and knowledge. This concept that they want to be connected, we've talked about that a lot. Have you sat in a Vistage group and had a discussion about whether we should share financial information with employees? And how much is too much? Do I just have a meeting? Do I tell it all? We lost money. Do I want to cover that with them? Have you ever thought that? Is that just my Vistage group?
No.
Yeah. Ever had that conversation? What do you do?
Sure.
Who shares and who doesn't share their company financial
We
performance?
share everything except for salary information.
Which they get anyway from Glassdoor, so really you're sharing that.
No, we're too small.
Yeah, we share. I mean, I think we've done both, where we've tried to share like the blocks of the P&L, but I think sometimes that's almost more than they want. They want to know, were we profitable? How much were we profitable? And we have one line worker who every company meeting raises her hand and says, "Is this going to affect my bonus? Is this going to affect our profit sharing?"
Yeah.
Right? That's what she wants to get to specifically, is what's the profit sharing result,
Yeah.
which kind of tells the rest of the story.
You should figure
right?
that out, Sally. You should definitely figure that out. How you're affected by the company is important, and you should figure that out. Let me know if I can help you. Have you ever had sharing backfire? Like, you're really good, you're going through this pattern of sharing, every quarter you're reporting numbers, and then like you lose money one quarter, and now you got to go report that.
Everybody panics.
Information. The flow of information is almost the definition of deinstitutionalizing, right? If it makes you uncomfortable, that is probably because you're bucking the institution in doing it. We've already talked about how you can't really shield these people. You can't shield them from competitors. You can't shield them from danger. There is this concept of isolation versus inoculation that really emerged in my research. The women in my study, as young women, felt very isolated. They felt like their parents isolated them from the outside world. In this close-knit religious group, they were shielded, they were protected. Everybody they associated with had these similar values, and they were really, 70s and 80s, they actually could be isolated. They were really isolated. And in many cases, that protected them. They felt like they made better choices. They didn't choose drugs. They didn't, sleep around at the age of 10. And they made a lot better choices because they were sheltered and protected. But now as adults, they're not sheltering and protecting their own children. And they use this word, they're inoculating their children. They're saying things like, well, I don't want to keep my children from knowing what's going on in the world outside, in this case, Mormonism. I want them to experience things in a controlled fashion where I'm there to help them and process that information with them. You don't know if you're never going to take a drink if you've never been offered one. And one woman said, I'm not offering my kids drugs, but, it's inoculation. I'm trying to build their moral character. Well, the concept behind isolation, the fundamental paradigm behind isolation is that I believe if you are in proximity to danger, let's use sin, because my research was about religion. If you are in proximity to sin, you will sin. There's nothing about you that will be able to prevent that. The sin is bigger and stronger than you. You know, my husband always says, you walk in the barbershop, you're going to get a haircut, right? If you're in proximity to sin, you're going to sin. And as adults, these women who got this message that if they were in proximity to sin, they were going to sin, they are taking a different approach with their children, which is that how you behave is about who you are and how you've decided to behave, not about who you're around. And who you're around will influence you, but you can choose who you're around. I care more about whether you have enough moral character to choose not to sin, no matter who you're around, than I do about preventing your exposure to sin, right? It's a little bit true in a corporate space, too. Inoculation versus isolation. Isolation doesn't work in an anti-institutional world. Isolation is a restriction of access to people and information. And we've already seen, I want to join multiple groups. I want to flow freely back and forth. I want to be part of conflicting groups. You know, everything is public. I don't believe in secrets. Isolation in our companies is about a message that you will not behave unless I control who and what you hear from and talk to. Isolation.
In the corporate world, this isolation, I'm curious on this. My mind went over to controlling behavior through SOPs, process, quality systems, driving a result because I'm forcing you to do these things in this order, in this manner to get this. So that's kind of...
Well, in a standard operating procedure that exists for a specific business purpose and can be clearly tied to the business purpose, may not be an overregulation of time and space. But a standard operating procedure that exists because I, as a manager, feel more comfortable that I know what you're doing all the time is an overregulation, right? Is it the framing? I mean, it could be the same policy. This SOP could be the same in both cases, but one is intentional and related to the results, and one is not. Yeah, so it kind of depends. Sharing the adventure. So one example of open communication and connecting to outside the company. We have a campaign. I think it's possible Austin invented this campaign. Good job, Austin. We have this campaign, Share the Adventure campaign, that is about, it's more fun to connect with other people. Adventures work better together. And this has been a good message for the market because the society as a whole is about connection, you know, and this plays into that connection message. But the thing that's significant about this for our employees is that what they now want to do with this is they want an HR program that helps them with this. They want to get some praise, incentive, reward, recognition for sharing the adventure with someone, for getting someone who's never been outdoors and bringing our camping equipment and going on an adventure with that person. And they want it to be part of their Jumpstart training program. They want to be able to choose this as an option in one of the things they're trained on, right? Employees are devising this, but it plays to their desire to connect outside the company. So I just use it as a quick example of that. All right, so the last point, visible equality, last principle. They want visible equality. We have already talked through some ways to do this and some of the challenges of doing this. It doesn't mean they want to do the same thing as everybody else. It just means that they don't want an institution to judge their worthiness and then hang it out in public for everyone to see how less worthy they are than the guy next to them. Right? It's not about everyone actually has to do exactly the same thing or have the exact same reward. It's about judgment, right? It's about judgment. So the cross-functional teams, the reporting, having non-managers lead those cross-functional teams, having sharing. We use a mentoring program that I actually tried to cancel this year, but it was too successful on our employee survey, so I didn't cancel it. Apparently, accidentally, I was tapping into something that mattered. I tried to cancel it because the program is the program tells people once a quarter to find their own mentor anywhere in the organization, and then it incents people for being mentors. So there's a little bit of a goodie for spending the time that it takes to be a mentor, and it tells people how to communicate with their mentor, meaning that you meet with your mentor in month 1, and you meet with your mentor in month 3, and you can do anything else you want with your mentor in between. And mentors, you need to have respectful communication. And so there's some guidelines related to communication in this mentoring program. But the reason people like this program is because it's cross-company. meaning they can pick the founder of the company as their mentor when they're the customer service person. They can, several people, the manager has picked the employee as the mentor. The salesperson and the accounting person have mentored. I can't remember who was mentoring who. I think it was actually the salesperson asked the accounting person to mentor him, which was interesting in this situation given those personalities. But what they have loved about it is that it's the system that we have created has normalized this equality, this sense that we all have something to teach, and that I can teach the owner of the company or the president something, and she can teach me something. I've been a mentor and asked them to mentor me in the same quarter. Sometimes it's a time commitment, but it's been one that's paid off in spades because it taps into this "I want equality" pitch. This concept that institutions inherently have kept me unequal, and in my anti-institutional frame, I don't want you to tell me I'm not good enough anymore. Okay, so.
Can I just ask on what your thought was on the first name?
Using first names?
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely specific to the workplace, right? I teach in a college environment, and using first names causes anxiety for some of my course supervisors. My students call me Heather, they don't call me Mrs. Stone. I have had feedback from some of the companies that I've worked with that using Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so is too off-putting. It says that I can't talk to you. You're more important than me. So one thing that we're seeing is that if we're all using our names, not our titles, we're all using a similar way to interact. I'm not saying it would work in every workplace, but it does work in some. It definitely does. And you can see the trend in the broader society of first names, right? I notice this when I work with my Asian factories a lot, because first names are not how you refer to the owner of the Asian company. That is just not how it's done in that particular cultural setting. In particular, this one Chinese factory I was thinking about, Chinese and Taiwanese factory, and I had to correct myself and do it their way in order to fit into the framing. But I was uncomfortable with it because it was clear that these employees had such a lesser status position than this person, and I had them both in a meeting, and I in my company, I do that differently. But with this factory partner, I needed to be aware of the status difference, right? So it's not going to be universally applicable, for sure. Okay, old way versus new way. The concept here, isolation. We've talked about isolation. It sends a message that if people know more, they can't handle it. It's a fear-based message. Isolation is what people are resisting. Too many rules. Too many rules send the message that you need me to tell you how to behave. Otherwise, you're going to be off the deep end. And you have to be compelled. Which, as a business owner, you maybe sometimes feel is true. Right? That they have to be compelled or they're not going to do the right thing. I'm not saying we live in this Pollyanna space where they'll just magically show up tomorrow and do everything I want them to do. I'm just saying that this is an important thing for them. Regimentation, telling someone where to be and when, it's a way for few to control many. Every time you're making a policy related to time and space in your company or disciplining somebody for something related to time and space, think about whether that is a historical artifact or whether it's actually necessary for the business purpose. Because if it's a historical artifact, it's about the good of the collective, not the good of the individual. So there's a handout. The last handout, number 6 on there, is kind of just some old way, new way concepts. We won't, of course, read through that handout. But I'll hold it up and talk to you about it as soon as I steal it from Blaine.
There's one. There you go.
Tell them what to do is the old way. Tell them why to do is the new way. Corporate services, where employee needs are a risk to be managed, and the department that contains HR and IT and legal is a corporate service versus employee services. That department is a service to employees. It's not a service to the corporation. That's a pivot in our language.
We're running really short on time,
Yeah,
so
done.
maybe they can read those.
Yeah, we're done. I was
Is
just
that
going to give
all
them one more
right?
example.
Okay.
So, mandatory programs versus the ability to opt out. Just one more example. Yeah. So we're done. It wouldn't it be nice if it were just that easy? It'd be nice if awareness of this society trend was enough to suddenly rework all our HR programs and all our interaction with employees, and if it would apply to every employee in every case, let me know if you get that all done perfectly tonight. If what you walk away with is a sense that something is going on in society that's going to affect how you and your employees work together, that's probably enough for starters. Just an awareness that they're caring more about these principles because of what they're doing in the broader society just makes us think differently when we begin to deal with a real person in a real situation and try to figure out how to actually monetize organization, how to keep doing what we've done so well, which is get all these people to work together to actually accomplish a purpose and grow society and ourselves in the process. So, my conclusion is anti-institutionalism is here to stay for now. And so frame yourself not institutionally when you interact, and you might be more in alignment with the trends. So, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, so for those who, it's your first time here, we do rapid recall, just something that struck you today that you're either going to